Bienvenidos todos. I'm here with Jody Rose, a very, very dear friend of mine, someone I appreciate and love, and I always enjoy running into you, even in this tough days of
Yeah.
the pandemic. Jody is the president of the New England Venture Capital Association and co-founder, I think, of more importantly, uh, probably a special life
Yeah.
mission. The purpose, right, is the co-founder of Hack.Diversity. Hack.Diversity is a program that partners with employers to bring Black and Latinx technologists into the field and helps organizations evolve to drive retention and promotion of that talent, right? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for
Um,
having me, Elias.
it's a privilege to
It's so
have
good to
you.
see you. I wish we could be in
Yeah,
person. Like you said, I always enjoy running into you. We are long overdue for a coffee
yeah,
or a sip of wine.
yeah, absolutely. We can
Yeah.
do either. Um, safely, just
Safely.
make sure
That's
to say
exactly right.
that. Tell me a little bit. Help me get to know you a
Yeah.
little bit more. I want people to know you, who you are as a person before we jump into all your accomplishments and the great things you do here in New England, of all places.
So,
Tell
yeah,
me
I
more
love
about
telling
you.
my origin story because I'm very proud of who I am and I'm proud of my roots. So, I'm a daughter of immigrants. I'm first generation American. Both of my parents were born and raised in Jamaica, came to the United States in search of the American dream. They actually met each other when they were here in the US. So, contrary to what people may think by me saying that, they didn't know each other when they were in Jamaica. And they came here in pursuit of the American dream. I grew up, was born and raised in New York, in Brooklyn, then Queens, and then moved out to a county called Rockland County. And my parents, I'm one of six kids, and for them, it was critical that all of their children were college educated and carved out a path of their own. But they were also focused on making sure that they provided us the best that they could with what they had and what they could afford. And so I actually moved to the Boston area about 15 years ago. I always like to say that I met a boy. He was cute. I followed him to Boston and got married and started a life here. And prior to Boston, I was actually working in the cable and telecom industry. I was working for Scripps Networks. For those of you who don't know, it's the parent company to Food Network and Home and Garden Television. And I started my career in telecom that way and was doing that for about 8 years and then moved here to the Boston ecosystem and quickly realized that there wasn't the same industry and didn't know what I was going to do, but did know that I was scrappy, that I loved the internet, as I was calling it at that time, and wanted to, continue my career in sales and business development and strategy. And I had an entrepreneur take a chance on me, Jeff Taylor, who founded Monster.com, who I reached out to on LinkedIn. He saw something in me and was like, come in and let's meet. And he was the first person that gave me my shot to work in the tech ecosystem here. And since then, I've been enjoying, working and living in this community and in Boston. Contrary to what some of my New York friends would think, we love it here. I think Boston is a very unique place, particularly for a person of color. Um, it's a unique place to start a career, start a company, as you know, Elias, to grow a company. It can be difficult because there is a historical nature of Boston that has led to very segregated communities, and we still have a long way to go in terms of providing opportunity for people. But I've been enjoying the ecosystem so far and the fruits of my labor, your labor, the labor of others, and so yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Wow, amazing. So many questions. I met the boy. The
The
boy
boy
is
is
cute.
cute.
I met the boy. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's Yeah, I came in
Yeah.
2000,
What
so
brought you here?
that was my first year. IBM,
Nice. Nice.
IBM. I I uh, I just love those stories of you know people giving a shot, right? I mean, I think that sometimes people ask me what is it that drives me
Mm,
to get up every day, and I think I dance around and I say people, people, people,
mm-hmm.
people, and it's like as I share, it's like being able to create companies where people can
Yeah.
build their careers, right? But then if I were to boil it down, I think you just nailed it. Maybe I should be
Hmm.
clear about that. It's just giving
Yeah.
people a shot because I appreciate so much the shots
Yep.
I've been given, right? And when I give a shot, I try to remind people, and I'm just trying to like pass all the wisdom and say like, I'm giving you a shot. Do you
Yeah.
understand like what it's like? Sometimes people don't
Yeah.
realize,
The
right?
opportunities.
And they're missed
Yeah.
opportunities. But and you don't miss them. I remember when you took on to on the New England Venture Capital Association. You
That was
jumped at it,
hard.
right? I do your boldness, right? I think that's something I admire, right?
So I,
Because that's something I feel that holds us back,
yeah, and
right?
so I admire that about you too because you're a serial entrepreneur. You've just had a pretty like amazing exit, so congratulations. But I would say
Milestone,
milestone.
milestone,
Sorry,
please, not an exit.
milestone. Thank you for the correction. But I will say, and I'm going to make an assumption that maybe you've experienced this along the way at IBM or pre-IBM. But being in spaces and oftentimes being the only person of color, the only black woman in these predominantly white organizations that are super creative and super profitable, uh, there's a level of having to feel like you're consistently trying to prove yourself and not just prove whether or not you belong in the room based on your abilities, but also proving that you belong in the room because of any preconceived notion that a person or people or a group of folks may have based on what you look like and based on what they assume your past looks like. And so when you talk about me joining the New England Venture Capital Association, it was the scariest year of my life. So I joined this org, which represents the venture community. I have no experience in venture capital whatsoever. And if I'm saying this, now in public, I really didn't even fully understand venture capital. I worked for a bunch of venture capital backed companies. I've been in those meetings. I knew how to talk about my side of the business, but it was very different than being in a seat where you're talking on behalf of this community. And I, from the onset knew that, okay, I am a black woman representing a predominantly almost all white male industry. And that was nerve wracking to the point where I definitely increased my visits to my therapist and to church because I was like, I don't know how
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to be successful in this role. And I questioned myself for an entire year. I look back now 6 months into the role, and it is the best risk and step and move that I've ever made. But it didn't come without the anxiety, the insecurity, and it was blood, sweat, and tears. And there's an adage that I talk about all the time where people says it takes a village. This took a village. It took a village of folks from my board to CEOs like yourself to the team that I work with to my family to really help me kind of, you know, get outside of what was holding me back internally to be bold, as you said earlier. So thank you, and do things that needed to be done.
There's two different types of imposter syndrome. I feel like there is the imposter syndrome that you're describing, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, where you're like, am I good enough to do this? Because we do that. Versus the imposter syndrome that people are like, they think they deserve it, right? They think that is owed to them, and that they know that they're just supposed to fake it, and it's just people
Mm-hmm.
blocking them, right? But it's all within their head versus the imposter syndrome that we have because there's no one else
Mm-hmm.
around us that like we can see and say like, is this normal? Is this not normal? We're like always in
Yes.
like in the echelons of the stuff that we're hanging with. It's like there's
No
just no
one
one
else.
else. Like it's
Should
just
I be
awkward.
here? Like, there were
Should I
many
be here?
times where I was like, do I have the right to be in this room? And when you asked me about my background, what a lot of people don't know is I started at the University of Maryland at College Park. I was pre-med for like a class, quickly realized that that was not going to be my thing, and then switched majors to marketing. But in my sophomore year, I dropped out of college, came back home, told my Jamaican parents, particularly my dad, don't worry, guys, I got this. I'm going to become an actress. dad, my dad, yeah, almost lost it. Thankfully, he walked in grace towards me, but about 2 months later, he came home with a piece of paper and said, "Here's your job. You report in on Monday. Like enough with you trying to wait for your agent to call you about auditions that weren't happening." And so now, many, many years later, I moved to Boston, the most highly educated state, or Massachusetts, the most highly educated state, where everyone who I was meeting had, and I eventually finished college. I went to a state school in New York, but not a competitive school and definitely not a name brand. And so I come to Boston. I was working for really good companies, had built a strong resume, but if you talk about pedigree, right, in terms of what I was being compared to with my local peers, I looked very different on paper, right? I wasn't coming out of these Ivy League institutions. I don't have an MBA. I have two doctorates. They're honorary, right? So I didn't have to go to school for them. People gifted them to me, and it's based on work that I've done, and I recognize that. But there was a lot of me going, I don't look like, and I'm not talking physical appearance, like physical appearance is one thing, but on paper, I still don't look like these people that I'm now representing and shoulder to shoulder with. And so you think about this imposter syndrome and do I belong and should I be here? That was beyond prevalent. It was the dominant feeling that I had. And so, I just find like as we're thinking about, you talked about earlier saying to people, do you recognize the chances and the opportunities I'm granting to you? I recognize that there were people along my path that said, I'm going to take a chance on you because I see that you are talented and I want to open up this door because, I want to help sponsor your next phase of your career. But that doesn't happen as often as it should. And so when you have leaders like yourself that are saying, okay, how can I help you get to the next level? It is incumbent upon people to take you and folks like you up on that offer because it
Yeah.
doesn't come easily. There's still a long road to hope.
Yeah, there is not an equal
No.
distribution of opportunities for many, many reasons. I mean, that is at the root of social
Hmm.
inequity, right? It's like there's just not many, and so people don't know how to value that. And so I've news on the imposter syndrome,
Tell
Jody.
me.
I'm
Good.
done.
Good.
No more imposter
Now, are you
syndrome.
done talking about it or are you done feeling it or both?
I'm done
Mm,
feeling it. It just trying to tell you that there is a light at
yeah.
the end of the
Yeah.
tunnel. It's a big
Yeah.
nirvana moment that I'm saying it's like I'm done feeling
Yeah. So
imposter
let
syndrome.
so let me
I
ask
just
you a
don't.
controversial question then. You're done with imposter syndrome. You are a unicorn. Your company's a unicorn in many ways. But let's talk about Elias, right? Elias is a unicorn because you fought hard, you worked hard to get where you are and to have these many milestones and to be a serial entrepreneur. So there's a privilege of having these experiences, and the successes that you've had. How do you then talk to and help younger people who are looking at you saying, I want to get there and I'm fundraising, or I want to get there and I am an entry level software engineer and I'm coming into these spaces still feeling imposter syndrome? What do you say to them? Right? Because at your stage in career, I get it. But for early career professionals and folks that are not taking the traditional path to get there, what do you say to them?
And thank you for bringing me onto the show, Jody. Uh, it's like, I appreciate being interviewed. I was approached by my agent, my producer. It's like, no, this is amazing. But we're going deep
We
into
are.
this. I actually help me answer this because um, my personality type is one that has to talk
Yeah.
things out. And David like knows me inside out. He's my psychologist. He's my
Mm-hmm.
therapist, and
Yep.
David Cancel. And I have to mumble and mumble, mumble and ramble until at some point it's like a crystal thought
Mm-hmm.
comes out, right? And so I think that it's good. You you bu- you what is it called? You're on the hook, right? You got the bait that I put in you. I want to help. So like let's take it different ways. I'll tell you one aspect of this. It's it irks me. I'm still that same individual. It irks me when people say you have the
Mm,
privilege,
mm.
right?
Oh,
It is such a, so I want to
yeah,
just you I want to let you
yeah,
explore that
yeah.
for me. It's is that
Mm,
I want to empower people to reach their own version of their
yeah,
American dream,
yeah,
right? Don't measure it
yeah,
against me, or I'm not going to measure it against Bezos.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, or so and so, or Eric Yuan, the CEO of
Mm-hmm.
Zoom. Is it like my company at that level or not? Everybody should go after their own
Yep.
version
I completely agree.
of
I completely
success.
agree.
And so that's one thing. And second, it's like I would like to differentiate at least between people that made it on their own through the help of others, but in their generation versus those that
Mm-hmm.
did not. I was just talking to an employee at Drift, and I was explaining to him that a 10, we added up. It's like, let's just set it for sake of simplicity. 10 years ago, I had three young children under five, sorry. My wife was at home with them full time. I had left IBM after 10 years. And when we would go to a restaurant, luckily the kids did not kind of get food. And if they did, it would be like a
Mm-hmm.
children's menu. Um, but my wife and I would split a meal because it's like every time we order a full plate, it was like too expensive. And I feel like we were too
Mm-hmm.
full. And so, like, leaving food on the plate was like,
That's
it would hit me
exactly right.
hard. And so, like, we would go out to eat maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. And if the bill was over $75, I was like, I'm like counting,
Mm-hmm.
right? The bill and making sure that doesn't add up to more than $75 because we couldn't
Mm-hmm.
afford it, right? So that was 10 years ago. And in 10 years, I was able to overcome imposter syndrome
Mm-hmm.
once and forever, right? And so I just want to make sure that I just that privilege thing
Mm-hmm.
bothers me a bit because they said, well, you have it's easy for you to say. What do you think I should
Mm.
say to that?
And I don't think it's easy for you to say it. I think, and so maybe the term privilege is the wrong way to say it, because if you had the privilege, I think in the context in which you're talking about it, that means you know 10 years ago you wouldn't have to take your wife and three kids out to dinner and hope that the bill doesn't exceed $75. That is not privilege, right? That's a part of your story, like your American dream story, how you got to part of and a piece of where you were and how you got to where you are. But I think what I would love for you to do as we're unpacking and processing this too, and I have to do this, is how do we take those stories? How do we take the arc of like our past and to where we are and showcase to folks that were, Elias 10 years ago, Jody 5 years ago, and say, okay, here's what I was dealing with. I know that I'm in a different place now. And so what you're concerned about, I'm no longer concerned about because I've lived that. But how do I help you quickly move from that place of feeling so insecure that you may or may never make it to being super bullish, to like believing in yourself more than anyone ever can, to believing you have the right to not just exist but have a seat at the table and pursue the careers you want, the company you want, the amount of salary that you want? How do we help more people not be Elias 10 years ago and Jody 5 years ago
Bingo.
who were like, holy crap, do I even belong here? And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Exactly. Exactly. No, good, and that's what we need to
Yeah.
figure out how to tell those stories, those arcs, right? And I think you so that is my life goal
Mm-hmm.
now, right? Is to encourage people to see what's
Mm-hmm.
possible. That in 10 years you can go from not being able to go to a
Mm-hmm.
restaurant to take care of your
Yeah,
families forever.
and when you and
Like,
families
we,
plural, right? Because it's not just you and your household, but it's extended families, and yeah.
this is very difficult to say. You know, I'm like, I don't know what I'm saying here. Like, I don't know what is good or bad for the world, for me, right, or for my
Mm-hmm.
family, right? But I care about diversity. I care about solving for social
Yep.
inequity. And I think the only way that we solve for inequity is by being equal, and only until more people take risk and they achieve their own version of success, and we show them all the possibilities out there, and we let them pick from which success they want to be a part of, right? uh, is really that then we won't have
I,
inequity, right? And so that's my
I think it's going
definition.
to take us a long time to get there. Uh, it's part of the reason
Absolutely.
why you're doing a lot of the stuff that you do behind the scenes, and I'll let you talk about that whenever you want to, help, to help fight inequity. But it was the main reason why, I was one of the co-founders of Hack.Diversity, which is a program that you and Drift have fully supported and participated in, and we've had long, hard conversations where, I definitely want to bring up some of that too because I think it's important. But it was important because I want people to recognize that, yeah, there are multiple avenues and pathways for them to seek success, but it's also important for the majority, right? So the majority of business owners, corporate America, people in these predominantly white male spaces to understand that the onus can't be on people of color only to figure this out. There needs to be some systems changes in how we are funding, in how we are employing, in where we're hiring from, and also standards that we're setting. And I'm not by any means saying that we should be lowering the bar. So let's please take that out of our vernacular. I never want any company to feel like they have to lower the bar for them to become more diverse. As a matter of fact, when people say that, I'm offended because I'm like, you shouldn't have to lower the bar for anyone. And if you're going to diversify your company, it doesn't mean you're lowering the bar. What we're trying to get you to do is broaden the aperture of how you think about funding and hiring so that you can hire your bar, become more innovative, and be a more competitive company. So happy to.
Well, hold on. I struggle with that one a little bit because wh- there's the bar, I think, in one way that we
Mm-hmm,
see the bar, but in others though it's
mm-hmm.
unfair, right? The lack of access and preparation and network that we
That's
have.
yes,
And so there has to be an adjustment there for that,
absolutely.
or at least, I'm just saying, like, it's like I'm not asking anybody to, like, throw me a bone and make my valuation higher than it
Mm-hmm.
should be from a business perspective, stuff like that, or like the potential of my business are like, no, I'm being measured by Sequoia, I've been measured by CRV,
Yeah.
by GC, but there's a lot of things that we didn't have access to that I saw other
That's
people have
exactly right.
access
And
to.
access is my
Right.
that's a big point for me. That's a huge point. And I'm gonna screw this up, but bear with me. But there's a saying that says, give a man a fish and he'll eat. Teach a man how to fish and he'll feed his family, or he'll learn. Like he'll be able to provide for himself. And when you talk about
Right.
access is a key part of this, right? How are we making sure that founders like you have more access to funding, right? And it's not
Right.
about, okay, how do we create programs just for minority business owners? It's like, no, how do we make sure that as venture capital funds are looking at building their portfolio of CEOs and new companies, that they are broadening their pipeline to not just rely on their networks, which are usually homogeneous, but they are really being intentional about saying, okay, if we want to get access to more companies and more founders and diversify our portfolio because we know that it'll give us access to more innovation, what are we doing to actually get there? And so for me, it's not about,
Right.
when I say lowering your standards, it's like, how do you broaden the aperture to look at talent, whether it be entrepreneurial talent or early career professionals, software engineers, hardware specialists, to give them access to these opportunities. But also, you talk about preparation as well. Preparation is key. So at Hack.Diversity, our whole goal is, how are we preparing the folks that we recruit, who we call fellows, into this fellowship that lasts for 9 months. How do we prepare them to be ready for these internships? And our preparation also happens on the company side. It's like, okay, we're asking you to bring in talent that you're typically not recruiting, or you're having a tough time recruiting. How do we help you make sure that you
Yeah.
are, being clear in how you're setting metrics and goals, How are we setting up your managers for success? How are we really pushing for mutual accountability and transparency? So I think there's a leveling up that needs to happen on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, I think you're providing preparation and you're providing
Mm-hmm.
access, right? So I think you're solving for those two things. I think, geez, it's been 26 minutes, I think, of recording. And so many
We
things
could
we
talk for a
can talk
long
for
time.
2 days straight. We should do like a Joe Rogan
I know.
3 hour podcast. Here's a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that we do a whole
Mm-hmm.
spiel, quick few minutes on Hack.Diversity, because if there's anything I want people to get out of this, is this wonderful program and how it has grown and how you're expanding and where you're going right with it. So I think that we need more of this. That's one. But before that, I'm trying to wrap up this idea of the imposter syndrome, right? And see what we can leave concretely with
Mm-hmm.
people, right? And I think it's something that you've done and I've done some of it. I done it in an accidental way. I think maybe you did it
Yeah.
in an accident. That like that boldness to step up and show up and say like I want to apply for this. I want to be the head of the New England Venture Capital Association, right? And so I think that I want people to believe me when I say that it was more in my head and maybe in your head, right, of the fear of not knocking on
Mm-hmm.
that door, right? Then the worst case scenario that would
Mm-hmm.
have happened, like that was, swirling in our heads. And so like, independent of whether people become successful or not, what I'm trying to push from the bottom, right, is to say, I want everybody
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
risk. Take
Yeah.
more risk. It's like every time I hear an amazing story of any immigrant. Yesterday, I was talking to another guest. Maybe don't spoil in case the order, however it goes out. But her family was from Miami, and they heard that there was work in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And the father just put all the belongings in
Yeah.
some car of some nature, and they drove out to. And it's like, and her whole life stems from decisions
Yeah.
like that, right? Those immigrant, amazing, amazing, wonderful immigrant stories. And so my story is like risks that
Mm-hmm.
I took. Your story is risks that you took from uh, college dropout that everybody would have
Mm-hmm.
been, oh my God, she's not going to
Yeah.
amount to anything and blah, blah. And none of that really matters. So, like, I just want to tell people, it's like going to college or not going to college does
Mm-hmm.
not matter. Just being not a software engineer, you can become a software engineer
Mm-hmm.
thanks to Hack.Diversity,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't think you can fundraise money? I started Drift at
Mm-hmm.
38 years old. People go, I don't have enough time. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
you got
Plenty
plenty
of
of
time.
time, right? And so it's like, no matter what level of success you achieve or don't achieve, it's like, we can help and give advice on like what's risky and
Yeah.
what's not
Yeah.
risky, right?
So the origin story of Hack is really funny, and I'll try to be brief, but it's a little bit long. So for those who don't know, Hack.Diversity, essentially our mission is to transform the economy by breaking down barriers for Black and Latinx engineers. We work with both companies and what we call fellows on a 9-month program where we're helping to provide mentorship, supports, and training for both the fellow who we recruit into the fellowship and for the companies who are saying to us, we want to work with you because we're looking for more talent. That talent can be software engineers, data analysts, and we're just launching a mechanical engineering or hardware track. So recruiting for that, and that's going to be launched in 2022. And our goal was, making sure that we were not just focusing on the pipeline, but also making sure that we were helping companies to improve their environment so that they're not just acquiring talent or getting talent in, but that the retention rates were high and talent was sticking and folks felt like they belonged. But if you back up to when I first joined the NEVCA, New England Venture Capital Association, as I talked about earlier, a lot of imposter syndrome. I didn't feel like I belonged. And then I met this venture capitalist who a lot of us know. I know you know him well, Jeff Busgang from Flybridge Capital. And Jeff, for those of you who know, is a type of VC that cares about funding companies, cares about returns, but he is very service oriented. And I like he has something else that drives him to be mission focused. And we sat down in our first meeting, and I never forget, he said, take out a notebook because I'm about to give you a lot of tips. I know you're new to the industry. A month and a half later, he forwards me an article that says that said, why can't Google and Silicon Valley hire black coders? And that article went on to profile a Howard University professor who was preparing some of his CS students for an internship out west at Google. And basically, the summary of the article just really highlighted the fact that these students felt underprepared and also like they were misfits and didn't fit culturally. And Jeff goes, this is not just a Silicon Valley issue. It happens across all tech ecosystems, and we are seeing it here pervasively in Boston. What should we do about it? So at that point, I'm 3 months in at the NEVCA. Again, black woman. And he goes, we need to do something about this. And so my response to him was, Jeff, got your back. Let me know how I can help. Because in my mind, I was going to send out a couple of tweets, a few emails, and then we were going to be done with it. And he goes, we need to launch this as a venture community. I'm tired of hearing from my portfolio companies that they can't find talent. And when I try to dig down and ask them, what are they doing about diversity? They look at me like I have three heads and say, were you not just present for the conversation where we told you we can't find talent and now you're asking us about diversity? And so we spent about 7 months trying to figure out what we were trying to solve, right? Were we trying to solve for the fact that there were less than 6% of Black and Latinx technologists, and that's a broad term, but folks represented in the tech ecosystem? Or were we trying to do data? And I was like, I don't want to do data. Like you can't walk a mile or a block without tripping over a study that tells you why diversity is good for business. And so what we were finding in our due diligence was that a lot of companies locally had very similar recruiting strategies, which was, we want to hire the best and brightest. So we're going to double down on Harvard, MIT, BC, Northeastern, which if I'm building a company and I come here, I'm doing the same exact thing. That's why a lot of companies come here. We have the best talent, pipeline, startup ecosystem in the world, second to none. But what we weren't hearing consistently was how these companies and these heads of talent were really tapping into the breadth of the talent landscape. And we came up with a thesis that, you can find the best and brightest anywhere. You just have to disrupt your hiring patterns, how you think about talent, what you require that they have just to be interviewed, and how you're onboarding and preparing them. And so when we basically launched, our focus was on not just getting the talent in, and we do a lot of professional development. We do project and product sprints with them. They break up into teams. They work with mentors. We work with IDEO Collab. We have folks from different companies that come in and help prepare them to get into these internships. So we're giving them the tools that they need to set them up for success. And then we're saying as a part of this program, they're going to get an internship at a company like Drift or at a company like a HubSpot or even on the biotech side or Boston Robotics. And the goal is to basically tap into individuals that are super bright, but for whatever reason, financial access, you name it, they just were not on the pathway to go to a Harvard. And although they're at a community college, they are super talented and they should be considered. And so we are now in our 5th year. We started in our first year working with 5 companies and 16 fellows. We just wrapped our 5th cycle with 100 fellows and 30 companies that we've worked with. And we limit the amount of companies and fellows we work with every year on purpose because we're really high touch. Next year, our goals will include working with 125 fellows and over 30 companies. And, I like to think audaciously and bold. This is not something that we want to limit to Boston. So in the next few years, you'll be seeing us pop up in other markets outside of Massachusetts.
It's unbelievable. I think this program, it's it summarizes everything that we've been talking about, right? It talks about, most importantly, you're the first one giving them a shot to the fellows, right? You're creating this. You're dedicating all your time, right, for to create that opportunity, right? And you created out of nothing, right? You're such an entrepreneur as well. Uh, to me, that person, one of those person in my, it was Michael
Mm-hmm.
Boyd. He was the head of the director of
Mm-hmm.
Inroads in
Mm-hmm.
Tampa. Black
Mm-hmm.
man. He came to my school. He
Yep.
recruited me to give me an
Yep.
internship that led to my internship
Yep.
at IBM,
And Inroads
which became my
has
full-time
been one
position.
of the programs that we've modeled after, right? Yeah.
exactly. And so it's like, so inroads, this was in 1996 that I learned about it. And they would train me on
Yep,
Saturdays
that's
to
exactly
like
right.
how to
That's
behave at
exactly
work.
right.
It's to reduce this imposter
That's what we're doing.
syndrome, right? Because the kids come out and they're like, if I'm allowed to call them kids, right? I'm an old man, but it's like they come out, right, and they're
Yeah.
afraid. I was afraid. I mean, I was working. My first internship at Inroads was a
Hmm.
Bank of
And
America,
you didn't know what etiquette
and
was,
it
right? You
was
were like,
like
okay, well, how do I act? How
I
do I
didn't
act
know.
when I show up?
I'm like my kids have ties. They go into my drawer. They can find a tie. I don't wear
Hmm.
ties anymore, but they're like, they know when they need to dress up. The school
Hmm.
dresses them up. There's purpose for them
Yep.
to dress up. I remember, Mr. Boy, like they're like getting me shirts and stuff and going buy shoes because I'm showing up at a bank with these baggy
Yeah.
slacks and these shirts with these
Yeah.
ties and my lunch bag and I'm going into a corporate world because everyone that I knew, I used to clean offices. We were working at the grocery stores, we were working at
Yes.
McDonald's, working at
Yes.
UPS,
Yes.
deliveries.
Yes.
It's and so it's like, do you think I was gonna feel comfortable,
And Elias,
like showing up at a bank with
and
all
your
these people?
story, that is the story of the Hack.Diversity fellow and their journey. Most of the fellows who we recruit, like they're working as a dishwasher at a back bay restaurant or an Amazon delivery person, or, they have a blue collar job. They're supporting a family. They're putting themselves through a school or boot camp, and they're trying to figure out, how do I get in? Like, what's my point of access? And Mike Boyd said, okay, I see Elias. There's something about him. I want to give him a shot. And that's what we're trying to do.
So what you do is amazing. You're giving people a shot. You're teaching them about access by bringing the companies and forcing
Yeah.
us to listen, right? And to say, give them a shot, hire them, pay, commit. You're training them. You're giving them preparation. You're giving them love, support. Uh, it's unbelievable. And I'm gonna maybe close with this story. I don't know if you know this story.
Sure.
So one of the Hack.Diversity fellows that we had at Drift um, started coming in late. And so leadership here, managers, whatever, I don't know, whatever we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
call them, they were like,
Mm.
so and so is not working out. It's just been disappearing. It just comes really late, like at 2 p.m. or something, and we don't know where this
Mm.
person is at. And so I'm like, crap. So like, I go, let's go for a walk. And so I go we go for a walk around here, the office. And I go, what's up? Why are you coming to work late? And he goes, it's the first time I've gotten paid enough to go to the dentist. I have, I have, I have 14 cavities. He goes, and it's like, so I have a lot of visits backed up, and so, and I'm embarrassed to tell people, right, that about it. Guess who had 14 cavities in college? And I went to the doctor, and the dentist pulls out this payment book, and I'm like, I'm not paying $2,000. And until I worked at IBM full time and I moved to Massachusetts, I finally went to my doctor, my dentist in Winchester, and committed to doing my 14
Mm.
cavities in early
Mm-hmm.
2000s, right? It's like, and so I had to go explain this to the
Yeah.
leadership and the management
Yeah.
team here of like, we don't all have access to
Yeah.
dentist
Yeah.
dental
Yeah.
care when we're
Yeah.
growing up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, this is the kind of stuff that you're enabling, right? That Mr. Boyd enabled me to do, and what you're doing is fantastic, and it is really hard. You and I
Yeah.
both know it, but we want people to know about it, right? When they say they can't hire diversity, well, like, until you take 2 to 4 fellows
Yeah.
yourself, every year, you can't complain because you're creating the access for
I
both,
also just have
right?
to give you major kudos for even pulling an intern aside. I mean, you're an executive, right? And for you to say, I need to stay close to this and know what's happening, and say, we're going to go for a walk, to really get to understand what was at the root of him being late and giving him that feedback and that coaching one-on-one. A lot of leaders don't do that. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, but well, this is the problem when you're a leader. You're not supposed to do these things. You're supposed to
Mm-hmm,
delegate.
mm-hmm,
You're not supposed to be
mm-hmm.
in the weeds. But I don't know. I don't. I listen. I try to take
Yeah,
coaching, but at the end of the day, we got to
you
do what
do.
we got to do, right? And I think that that's the path of an entrepreneur. You got to take risks and do that. But it's all
Yeah,
about people. I think it's like I said earlier. Why do I do this? Why am I still doing this? It's to give
you're
people a
exactly right.
shot, right? It's like there's nothing more rewarding than being able to have taken advantage of shots that were given me. You're taking those shots, and now you're giving the shots back, right? And so,
It's it's
thank you.
always so good to see you. I wish we had more time to talk because I have so much to say, but I know we don't want to spend too much time because then the listeners won't listen to the whole conversation. I just love you, man.
Same, same.